Chapter 8. The Strange Secret. Nancy, in the pitch-black attic, kept perfectly still. She hardly breathed. Chills ran up and down her spine. The music had ceased, but from nearby came the sounds of stealthy footsteps. These were followed by muffled rapping sounds. There isn't a harp or a piano here, Nancy told herself, trying to regain her composure. Maybe this is just a trick to keep people out of the attic. The rapping had stopped now. Nancy reached again for the flashlight. This time she found it, but to her dismay it would not light. The store clerk must have sold me a defective battery, Nancy said to herself, frowning. She was too far from the stairway to get there safely in the dark, among the maze of boxes and trunks. What am I going to do? Nancy thought. Suddenly, she heard her name murmured. Nancy! Nancy! It must be Mr. March, she concluded, as the call became louder. Thank goodness. Now there'll be a light. She stood up, then froze to the spot as a new thought struck her. If someone really were in the attic, he might harm anyone coming up the steps. Summoning all her courage, Nancy called out loudly, I'm in the attic! Don't come up! Just hold a light for me at the foot of the stairs. Nancy had expected a hand to be clapped over her mouth, but nothing happened. In relief, she called out again, saying her flashlight was not working. A few seconds later, a light shone up the stairway. Mr. March was speaking to her cheerily. Nancy gingerly found her way across the attic. Soon she was back on the second floor. Mr. March took hold of her arm. You're white as a sheet, he said. Something happened. What was it? Did anyone touch the piano downstairs? She asked. The piano? No. Why? I thought I heard a few notes of music, Nancy replied. You're not telling me all you know, the elderly man said. I want to hear everything. Don't keep anything back. I'm afraid somebody or something is in the attic, Nancy admitted. After my flashlight went out, there were all kinds of ghostly noises. Mr. March grunted. I'll fix him, he said, and started up the stairs. Nancy tried to hold him back. I've faced the enemy before, he declared, holding the candle aloft. And it's high time I found out about that mysterious attic. Nancy followed him. To her chagrin, they found no one, nor was there any evidence of a secret entrance through which an intruder might have come. On the floor near the spot where she had stood lay a large toy bear. It must have fallen from the rafters, Nancy decided. She told Mr. March this was one of the strange events that had occurred in the past 15 minutes. I guess the bear fell on me, she added. That bear belonged to Phip, his father explained. I haven't seen it for years. Nancy was apologetic for having worried him. She picked up her flashlight and said no more about the incidents. But she knew that she had not imagined the stealthy footsteps, the rapping sounds, and the musical notes. Who and what had made them remained a deep mystery. Here's a surprise for you, she said, changing the subject. I located one of the old songs under a pile of newspapers. Mr. March scanned the parchment eagerly. Finally, he spoke. Oh, yes, I remember this. The old and the new. He nodded, humming a few bars of the tune. My mother composed the tune, and Phip later added to it. It was one of his finest." "It's the best find we've made yet," said Nancy after they had gone downstairs. "If Ben Banks has published a song with this melody, you'll certainly have a case against him." "I hope you receive a reply to your letter very soon," the elderly man said. He sighed, adding, "This suspense is rather hard on an old fellow like me." Nancy spoke a few words of encouragement and showed him the valuable old shoe buckles. Then she said good night. That weekend she was kept busy with the housework and had no chance to go to the attic. But she took time on Saturday to run into the business section of River Heights to see Mr. Faber. The dealer gave her a good price for the buckles. Mr. March was overjoyed at the encouraging news. "How wonderful!" he exclaimed. "Oh, Nancy, I'll never be able to repay you for your kindness." Nancy brushed aside the comment modestly. She knew that the money she had been able to acquire was still not sufficient to take care of Susan or the house expenses indefinitely. By Monday, Effie was able to assume the duties of the household once more, and Nancy returned to her own home. Mr. Drew greeted her cheerily. "Well, I'm glad to see my daughter again," he said affectionately. "I believe I should take the day off and celebrate." Knowing she was being teased, Nancy asked, "Are you taking a holiday?" "I'm on my way to see Mr. Booker," her father replied. Nancy queried him about the progress he had made in clearing up the mystery of the stolen formula for creating the lovely silk material. "Absolutely none," Mr. Drew confessed. "Men have been shadowing the dite plant ever since you were there, but they haven't seen Bushy Trot go in or come out of the building." "Maybe he lives there. Would you like me to go back to the factory and find out?" Nancy asked. "Not yet, but I may call on you later. Mr. Booker is so sure his process is being imitated that whether or not Trot is there, he wants me to start suit against Lawrence Dite." "Will you do it?" "Not until I have a little more evidence," the lawyer replied. "One has to be mighty careful when accusing a person of Mr. Dite's standing. Up to now, Mr. Booker hasn't explained much about how he makes the special silk material, so I'm on my way to find out. Want to go with me?" "You won't have to ask twice." "Then we'll be on our way. Later, if one of us gets into the secret section of the dite plant, we'll be able to compare the two methods." Nancy and her father were welcomed cordially by Mr. Booker, who was eager to conduct the Drews through his plant. "First, I'll show you the gossamer garment room," he declared, leading the way. The gossamer room contained several bolts of filmy white silk material, like that used in the scarves Nancy had seen. Others were in various colors, while a few were patterned with artistic and unusual designs. "They're beautiful!" Nancy exclaimed. Clever designers had fashioned some of the materials into attractive dresses, which hung row upon row in dust-proof glass cases. "I've never seen anything so lovely," Nancy said. A pale yellow evening gown caught her eye. "What a stunning dance dress!" In texture, it was unlike anything she had ever seen before. "The material is strong," she said, "yet it looks delicate enough to dissolve at a touch of the hand." "That's why we call it gossamer," Mr. Booker said proudly. "I'll show you how it's made. You must promise, of course, never to reveal my secrets." "You can trust us," said Mr. Drew. The factory owner unlocked a heavy metal door and led his callers into a room where two men sat at tables, engaged in a most unusual occupation. "This is my spidery," Mr. Booker explained. Here I breed orb weavers under glass. They provide me with the silk threads I need for my material." "You actually use spiders," Nancy gasped. "Yes," Mr. Booker smiled. "They are very useful to man when one understands how to put them to work." Nancy watched curiously. One of the men was holding a spider in a pair of forceps. The little insect was exuding a filmy thread from its spinneret. With his other hand, the man was winding the silk onto a spool. "The spiders work fast," Mr. Drew remarked. "One of them can spin a web half a yard across in less than an hour," Mr. Booker revealed. "Now I'll show you how we make the thread strong enough to be woven into cloth." Nancy and her father were escorted to the room where the secret chemical formula was mixed. Not only did Nancy look at the solution in the various tubes, but she took particular note of the peculiar scent it produced. "I'd be more likely to recognize the odor than anything else. If this chemical is being used at the Dite factory, maybe I can identify it that way," Nancy thought. Mr. Drew inquired if this was the department where Bushy Trot had worked. "Yes," Mr. Booker replied. "He was in this section. He came to me highly recommended as a chemist. Because he left my employ abruptly, I suspect that he was sent here as a spy." Mr. Drew told the manufacturer there was plenty of evidence now against the rival concern. "We're still trying to check on Bushy Trot," he said. "The next step will be to find out how Lawrence Dite is making his silk material." "If only I could get into his factory again," Nancy remarked to her father as they drove away from the Booker plant. "Couldn't you arrange for another trip with your friend Diane?" "She's scarcely a friend, Dad. But I'll think up a way," Nancy promised. After dropping her father at his office, she had an inspiration. If her scheme worked, she would get into the factory. On impulse, she drove directly to the Dite home to put her plan into action. The spacious grounds were located at the edge of the city and were screened from the road by a high, ivy-covered fence. Nancy turned into the winding driveway and coasted to the big white house. End of Chapter 8.